In this video, we're gonna dig into how you color grade your footage coming out of your DJI drone. Now, DJI drones have 3 different color profiles depending on which drone you're using, and I'm gonna show you how to use the standard profile, the D-Cine-like profile, and the D-Log profile, and how I'd approach a color grade for each one of these different looks. And I'm gonna show you how to do this both completely manually using all the different tools that you'll find in any color grading software, and also using LUTs in both the color correction and also the creative color grading step. But before we dive into how you color grade your DJI footage, I just wanna say a special thanks to Motion VFX for sponsoring this video. And Motion VFX is where I get all of my plugins to do things like motion graphics or different overlays that you see on my videos. They create plugins that are super easy to use and that are fully customizable so that you can change them to make them fit your brand and the types of videos that you're creating. You can get plugins for Final Cut Pro, DaVinci Resolve, as well as Premiere Pro and After Effects. And if you don't use one of these 3 softwares, there's also a lot of stock elements that you can use in any editing software. And one of my favorite plugins that I personally use is the MTuber series. And you'll see I'll add things like a subscribe button or a text overlay when I'm doing one of my tutorials, and also animations like hands or arrows that point out exactly what I'm talking about. This kit has a ton of tools and transitions and different overlays that you can use for your YouTube videos. Now, the best part about using Motion VFX plugins is it saves time. It's super easy to download one of these packs and drag and drop these plugins on top of my footage and just add some customization like different colors, different fonts that really fits my brand and what I'm doing here on my channel. And right now there's a black sale going on for Motion VFX plugins, which means that you can get 30% off any of the plugins or templates. And every week that this sale is going on, there's gonna be 16 different packs that are 50% off. So make sure you check back every week from now until December 4th to see which packs have this 50% discount. So if you wanna add some different Motion VFX graphics to your videos, make sure you head down the description. I'll include a link to where you can check out the sale right now. So let's dig into how you color grade DJI footage. And to do this, I have a few different shots that I've pulled to show you how we do this color grading. I have some that are in the standard color profile that are shot with the DJI Mini 2. I have a few that are shot with the DJI Mini 3 Pro that are in the D-Cine-like profile. And then I have a couple shots here that are shot with the DJI Mavic 3 that are in D-Log. And the difference between these 3 profiles is the amount of contrast and saturation that each one has. So when you're working with the standard profile that you'll find on all the drones, this footage is basically ready to use out of camera. It has lots of contrast and lots of saturation. So you don't actually have to color grade this if you want to use this in your videos. However, if you do want to create a creative look, then you'll modify the colors and modify the contrast a little bit to make it look different than what you actually filmed in camera. Now, D-Log footage is going to have the least amount of contrast and the least amount of saturation. And the purpose for this is to color grade later. So you would only shoot in D-Log if you're intending to color grade your footage. And when you shoot in D-Log, the highlights are pulled down and the shadows are lifted so that you get the super flat image, which is gonna allow you to get the most dynamic range out of your camera. And the dynamic range is the amount of exposure that you can see from the brightest parts of your image to the darkest parts of your image. And so when you're shooting in a standard profile, you might lose things like your sky. It might turn bright white, whereas when you shoot in the log setting, you're gonna be preserving those highlights so you can color grade them and actually get some blues out of the sky or actually see the clouds rather than it just being pure white. D-Cine-like sits right in the middle. So it's not like standard where it has contrast and saturation. However, it's not super flat like the D-Log. It's just halfway between. And so this profile is gonna give you the ability to color grade, but you're not gonna have to push your footage that far because it does have some contrast and it does have some saturation. Now, you might wanna shoot with D-Cine-like versus D-Log depending on the type of drone that you're using. So some of DJI's drones only shoot in 8-bit, which if you shoot a log footage in 8-bit, it's gonna be harder to color grade because there's not as much data as a 10-bit image. So the new DJI Mini 3 Pro has a 10-bit image, which is gonna allow you to color grade and push it around a little bit further than if it had an 8-bit image. And so depending on the drone that you're using, if it's only shooting in 8-bit, it would be better to shoot in D-Cine-like than to shoot in D-Log because you have to push your colors and your contrast further when you're shooting in a log format. However, if you have the DJI Mavic 3 Cine, which has ProRes, well, you'll want to shoot in log because you're gonna have a lot of flexibility to be able to move your colors around. And even working with the 10-bit files out of the Mavic 3, I've noticed that the image will break apart somewhat when you're pushing the grade too far, and you'll see things like banding in the sky when you start pushing those colors too far. Now there's 3 tools that we're gonna be using to color grade in this video, and you'll find them in most color grading softwares. That's curves, your color wheels, and your HSL curves. And to be able to see our exposure and our colors, we're gonna be using 2 different scopes. Now, right now I have pulled up what's called a Luma waveform. And so this shows all of your exposure values from black at the 0 to 100%, which is white at the top. And so when I scrub through this shot here, you could see that the sky is overexposing all the way at the top. And then these parts in the bushes here are super dark. That's down here pretty close to 0. And that's because this shot was a shot from my DJI Mini 2, which was shot in the standard profile, so you have all of that contrast and saturation. Now the second scope that we're gonna be using is your vector scope. And this shows a color wheel, and it shows all of your color values on top of a color wheel. So you could see in this shot here, there's a lot of blues and a lot of greens, and this white part in the middle of the scope is called your trace, and it's pulling towards your blues and cyans, and also towards the greens. And so when we start playing around with colors and we want to create a look out of our footage, you'll start seeing your vector scope move around towards the reds or the purples or the blues or the greens, wherever you're trying to push the image. And we're gonna use these 2 tools to be able to see color on a graph. So the process for color grading is fairly simple. And the first step is getting your footage to a standard look. So the footage that you're shooting in standard is already there. You might do some fixes in your color if you shot with the wrong white balance, but overall, that is the standard look that you're gonna be pushing your Decinelike and your log to before you do a creative color grade. And then step 2 is once you have that standard look, is you add a creative color grade on top of that. So this is where you start tweaking your colors, you create a look that matches the type of scene that you're shooting, and this is also where you're just gonna have fun and play around with color grading. So let's go one by one and just do a color grade on each one of these shots, and through the process of seeing how I approach each one of these shots, you'll see the whole workflow and how each tool works. So let's start with this shot of me hiking with this epic landscape behind me. Now, this was shot using the DJI Mini 2, so you can see there's lots of contrast and saturation. On my Luma waveform, you can see that parts are overexposing, parts are pretty much at 0, and we switch over to our vector scope, and you can see there's a lot of saturation. So 0 is no saturation, which is right in the center, and then when you move out towards the edges, that's lots of saturation. So I'm just gonna first bring up my wheels, and I'm gonna show you how your adjustments are gonna affect this shot. So if I was to add saturation, you can see that the image becomes super saturated and your trace is pulling towards the edges. Now, if we go over to the waveform, if I was to add exposure into your highlights, all of this goes white, and you can see here that, well, it's overexposing way over 100. And the same if I pull my shadows down, now everything is black, and you can see all of my exposure values are hitting the bottom line 0. So let's reset this, and this is the shot that we've started with. So for a shot like this, what I would typically do is maybe do a little tweak to the highlights and bring them down. And with DJI footage, I tend to bring my midtones down. And so when you're working with your color wheels, you'll have the ability to change your exposure in your highlights, your midtones, and your shadows. And so to get my shot looking to where I want to start doing a creative color grade, I'll typically play around with my highlights and my midtones when I'm working with the standard footage out of DJI. Now this is also where you can change your color temperature. So if you shot and it's looking a little bit blue, well, I might change my color temperature and add a little bit of warmth back into this footage. And you could also do that if it's looking too green or too magenta, you can change your tint. So for this shot, it was looking a little blue, so I added a little bit more warm tones back into the shot, and here's what it looks like. That's just a standard look. Now, I could use this shot as is and start editing. And a lot of times when I'm working in a quick workflow, this is what I typically do, is I'll just do a few tweaks and move on. But if I want to create more of a look, well, from here, I'm either gonna do a creative look on my own or I'm gonna add a LUT. So let's first do a creative look. I'm gonna add my HSL curves, which is hue, saturation, and luma. And so these look a little daunting at first, but they're actually fairly easy once you understand what each one of these does. Hue versus hue just changes specific colors. So if I was to target my sky, you could see that it's gonna add some dots here, and I can change the color of the sky based on how I pull this graph up and down. And the same thing, if I pull here in my greens, I could change the colors of the ground and the trees and all of that. And you can get super precise with this, or you can make big broad strokes and just do a slight change to push your colors in one way or the other. Now, the same thing with your hue versus saturation. However, what you're affecting is your saturation. So if you grab your sky and pull this up, you're gonna add a ton of saturation, or if you pull this down, you're gonna add little saturation. So if you're taking a shot and you wanna desaturate your sky but keep your foreground saturated, you'll go in and target just the sky and pull down that color. And the hue versus luma does the same thing, however, this is for exposure. So if you wanna grab your sky and make it darker, you pull down and it's gonna make all your blues darker. And when you start messing with them too much, you're gonna see the image will break apart, especially on 8-bit footage. On 10-bit footage, you'll have a little bit more room, and ProRes footage, you'll have even more, but you'll start seeing the footage break apart when you're using these graphs, so you wanna do subtle motions. It's all about coming up with an idea of what you wanna grade and then create some subtle looks out of that. So for this shot here, I wanna take out the saturation in the sky. I've pulled up my vector scope just so I could see my colors on a graph. I'm gonna go through it and I'm gonna start pulling down all the colors that are in the sky, the blues and cyans. And you can see over here on the vector scope, when I do that, it goes more towards the center. And so now my shot has all my saturation in my yellows, reds, and greens, but not a lot in blues, cyans, and magentas. And also I wanna change the color of this foreground. So I'm gonna go to hue versus hue. I wanna grab this section here, which is my reds, and let's make that a little bit more green. So I'm gonna add a point here and I'm just gonna target this a little bit more. And now the last part is I wanna make the sky slightly darker. It's a little bright for my taste on this shot. So I'm gonna add hue versus luma, the sky. It's gonna make those clouds pop a little bit more. And then I'm gonna add one more point here in the reds. I'm just gonna add a little bump to that. And so now here is the before and after of the shot. And you can see that I've created a different look out of this footage. And creative color grading really comes down to what you're going for. There's no right or wrong way. And one of the things that you're gonna wanna do when you're coming up with your creative color grades, just look at other creators' work. Look at films, look at what you like watching on YouTube and see how they color grade and start figuring out where's their contrast or where's their saturation or what colors pop. You'll start noticing that different creators have different styles that they use, and you'll start being able to see color and see contrast in a different way now that you know how all these tools work. All right, so I took off the HSL curve. This footage is back to where it was, and now I'm gonna add a LUT. And in Final Cut, I just add a LUT by dragging and dropping, and I have this custom LUT function. Different softwares are gonna have different abilities, but a LUT is a .cube file that you add on top of your footage that gives you a specific look. And I'm gonna use one of my LUTs that I have called Hollywood, which creates an orange teal look. And you'll see immediately on the vector scope, all of the colors are pulled towards the red, yellow, orange, which is right here, and also the cyan. And the orange teal look is your typical Hollywood look that you'll see in a lot of motion pictures, which you'll see behind me, teal, orange. And so this LUT that I've built basically creates this look in your shot. However, it's a little bit too extreme. And so when I add LUTs, I could bring it down to 0, which is adding none of the LUT onto it, or up to 100, which is 100%. And when I add LUTs, I'll add like 50% on the shot. And I might even tweak it further from here by going to my original color grade, which is this color wheels, and just doing a few tweaks. So for this shot, I might just bring up the midtones a bit to bring up this foreground, and then bring down the saturation of these highlights because it's a little bit extreme. And now I have a shot that has a different look than the original, and I did it much quicker just using a LUT and doing some minor tweaks. And this is the process that you're gonna go through for all of the footage. So now let's look at a D-Cine-like shot. So I have this shot of me kayaking in Alaska. I'm gonna bring this down to my timeline, and we're gonna do the same thing. However, there's gonna be a little bit more work on the front end to get this shot looking to standard. So let's pull up our waveform and look at our exposure, and then we're gonna add on curves. And I'm gonna show you just a different way to play with exposure than your color wheels. And so on curves, your highlights are over here in the upper right-hand corner, and your blacks are down here in the lower left-hand corner. And so you can see as I raise my blacks in this image, it becomes super washed out, whereas if I bring down my highlights, it gets super dark. So you're gonna use this to control your contrast of this shot. And you could just add points on this graph And then what I would do is bring down the darker parts of my image and might bring up slightly some of the highlights, and I'd play around with my mids to get them where I like them. That shot's looking better, and then I'm gonna go to my color wheels and just add some saturation to the shot. I'll pull up my vector scope to see what I'm doing and just add some saturation. And now this shot is looking much more standard than the original, which had a more flat look. Now from here, you could do the exact same process of going through and using your HSL curves, or if you don't want to target specific colors and you just want to target, say, the highlights, well, you can do that here in the color wheels. So you had highlights, midtones, and shadows, and then full global effects here. And if you want your highlights to be less blue, well, blue's here on the color wheel, and you could pull away from your blue and add some color into all the highlights. Now, obviously you can make this extreme, which that doesn't look very good. But if you wanted to, say, add just a little bit more warmth into this shot and take out some of those blues, I just adjusted my highlights over to more yellows and oranges and greens. And same with midtones, I could play around with these, maybe take a little bit of green out and just push it more towards magenta. And then for shadows, maybe I'll just pull out the saturation. So now I'm tweaking this shot based on just my color wheels versus using the HSL curves. There's a lot of different ways that you can go through and do your color grade. You either could do broad strokes, what you're seeing with the color wheels, or you do more targeted and specific changes, which is what I'd use the HSL curves for. Now I'm gonna pull up this other shot where I'm hiking through the forest, and instead of using my curve to change my exposure, I'm gonna use the color wheels. And so we'll pull up our waveform. You see there's a gap here between 75 and 100, so we can pull our highlights up to add more highlights to this shot, bring our shadows down, maybe bring the midtones down and add a little bit of saturation to the shot. And now we have more of a standard look. I would even bring the shadows down further with this and just tweak it to my liking. And then from here, I'll do a creative color grade on this. So let's add a LUT to this shot, hiking through the forest. I'm gonna pick one of my LUTs that I've made for drone footage called Orizaba. It's gonna change the colors and it's gonna change the exposure slightly. I'm gonna just put this at 75%. So this is the before and after for a D-Cine-like shot, and you could see how quickly you could go through, do some slight adjustments, get it to a standard look, and then create a creative color grade. Now the last thing I wanna show you is D-Log, because D-Log takes a little bit more work to get it to that standard look. So I have this shot here, which is in a crazy state park in Utah. I'm gonna add this in, and I'm gonna pull up my waveform so you could see all of your exposures. This is a very flat image. So you can see all of your exposure values are here in the middle, not stretching out to 100 and 0. So I'm gonna pull up first my curves, and I'm just gonna add adjustments to get my contrast looking where I want. So I'm gonna pull my shadows down, pull my midtones down, and keep tweaking this until I'm happy with the way this looks. And now this shot has contrast, so you can see there's dark elements and there's bright elements, but we haven't lost the sky and we haven't lost any information in the shadows. So I'm just gonna pull up my color wheels and add some saturation to this. And you can see that this shot now looks more standard and ready to start doing some tweaking to create a creative look. Now, if you're working with D-Log or D-Cine-like, you could also use a LUT to get to this standard look. And these are called conversion LUTs. So let me pull up another shot that's shot in D-Log. This is from when I was overlanding out in Utah. We have a lot of contrast in the shot, and when I pull up my waveform, you'll be able to see that even the sun, it's the brightest part of the image, it's pulled really far down. So we need to add a lot of contrast to this. So I'm just gonna add first a LUT, and I'm gonna use a conversion LUT. So I'm gonna go to my LUTs. I have some different conversion LUTs that I personally have built that I like, and instantly, it adds contrast and saturation, and I could just use that and walk away, and this shot could be ready to use. And so sometimes if you're working in a fast workflow, you might just use a conversion LUT to go from 0 to a standard look, and you might just be happy with that. But from here is where you could tweak and do more creative looks. So I'll add another LUT on this. I'm gonna use my LUT that's called Yucca. It's gonna change the colors, make it a little bit more yellow, because I built this for desert landscapes. And I'm gonna dial that to like 70%. So now I've added a conversion LUT and then a creative color grade, and the shot's ready to go and I can use it as is. So a lot of different workflows that you could fit into how you want to color grade your footage. If you want to get my LUTs that I've built specifically for DJI drones, I'll include those down below in the description. Now, if you want to dig deeper into color grading, I have a full course on creative color grading over on my platform, the Creator Film School, and I'll include a link to that down below in the description. You can get it as part of my membership, or you can buy it as a standalone course. But next, you should check out this video right here, which goes through a ton of tips on how you're going to get better drone shots when you're out filming. I'll see you over there.